welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we are going to be discussing Colorado Buffaloes, particularly their victory versus Baylor, and also just what we should be expecting from Colorado for the rest of the season. Now, I'm sure every college football analyst has been talking about Colorado to some capacity. And on this show, I've really tried to avoid talking about them as much as possible because so many other people have a take on them, have an opinion on them. But after one of the most spectacular games I've watched in a very long time, I have pretty much just caved in and decided, hey, this is the week to talk about Colorado, especially after that Baylor game between the fourth quarter, particularly when Shedeur Sanders he threw that pass right to Will Shepard and it hit him in the chest, and then the Hail Mary to lead into overtime, and then the immaculate play the heads up play that Travis Hunter made to strip the quarterback or to strip Sawyer Robinson of the football right as soon as he passes that goal line was just incredible. And to see the fans rush the stadium, it was rush the field and everything. It was awesome to watch. And I know people were bitching about that too, but I'm all for it, man. I think it's great if you go and you pay your hard earned money to go out there and your team wins the game, why not celebrate a little bit? I get, beating Baylor is not winning it's not winning the Big 12 or it's not winning anything crazy like that, but it's a significant win, especially when, at one point they were, down by a couple possessions and, Baylor's defensive line was really giving Shedeur Sanders a lot of trouble too. I mean, stats that I have for this game, he was sacked 8 times and being hurried at least 15 plus times with a 61% completion percentage. So when you have those things going against you, it really it really is a testament to you know how much Colorado has really kind of adapted, and also I'll give them credit they've evolved too. I think the one thing before I go into Colorado's offense that I don't think they got enough credit for it was particularly their defense this game. I mean, when you sit down, you look at the box score, and you think about the game in the full picture. I think their special teams definitely deserves some criticism too. I mean, they gave up a kickoff. They gave off a kickoff for a touchdown and also a significant punt return that ultimately led to 3 points as well. So when you think about that, I mean, Colorado's defense only gave up 20 something points. And, you know, in college football standards, 20 something points is definitely manageable, especially when you have such an electric offense, such as Colorado does, when you can pretty much expect at least 300 plus passing yards from Shedeur Sanders. Travis Hunter is going to get at least 100 plus passing yard or receiving yards. And by the way, that's his fourth straight game with 100 plus this season. And when you put all those things together, it's definitely one of the most exciting and riveting performances that I've seen in a while. And I think it's just going to add fuel to the fire in terms of more people wanting to watch Colorado, as well as some of their games they have coming up too. And as I look at this Colorado program kind of full circle, there are a couple things that come to mind. But first and foremost, let's clear the air here in terms of them being ranked. They have no business being ranked right now, and nor they shouldn't be. I mean, granted, North Dakota State is a really much better win than people give them credit for, especially since they've been an FCS powerhouse for so long. So that was good. I mean, obviously the Nebraska game, like they just simply got their ass whooped, and were just not prepared, for that game. And and Nebraska defensive line was just no was that offense Colorado's offensive line was just simply no match for them. And even this week, as you saw them kind of revamp the offensive line, you really didn't see a whole lot of difference. Shedeur Sanders was constantly under pressure. You were always asking him to be able to scramble out of the pocket and try to make plays with his legs. And quite frankly, Travis Hunter and a lot of his wideouts were bailing him out a lot of the time too. When players can only cover for so long, and when you have those sort of issues, I think moving forward, that's my biggest concern when I see Colorado. I I think Pat Shermer's a great play caller. I think he gets a bad rap for his time in the NFL, particularly, when he was with the Browns and the Giants. I get all of that, but let's face it, those two teams were very difficult situations to win in, and I think he's done an excellent job there. Maximizing Shedeur Sanders, letting him letting him feel comfortable, letting him get the reads right. But obviously, there's only so much you can do with the offensive line. I mean, I think this kind of goes back to what I've been kind of egging on consistently on the show, which is I am a firm believer that any college football program that does want to win a national title, it ultimately does start with high school recruiting. And when you constantly have the ins and outs of the transfer portal and everything, that's the risk you take. And ultimately this time they rounded up some new offensive linemen. And right now it's a very similar narrative to what we saw last year, except you know I think what we're seeing different from this year to last year is I think Shedeur looks a lot more confident. He looks a lot more poised, which I give him credit for. He's he's double downing on the pressure that he's, quite frankly, I think put on himself, especially when you see some of his antics between the rap videos and the issue he had with the Colorado State quarterback too. So I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt, but I like, I don't mind when players play with some swagger as long as you back it up on the football field. Hey, it's, if that's your thing, then hey, why not go for it? But, you know, I think the biggest issue, kind of going back to the overall point of this video is, to what extent can Colorado really keep this up? I mean, they went 4-8 last year. They had some injury issues, and I think this team does look better than last year. But, even kind of moving forward here, I mean, I think this UCF game is a pivotal matchup, especially you're traveling to UCF. I think they're one of the most improved programs in the entire country in terms of Power Five, in terms of Power Four football. I mean, I think Gus Malzahn is a really underrated coach who I don't think ever really gets enough credit. But over the past couple of years, he's really built a legitimate program down there. You have KJ Jefferson, who's a dog. He's fun to watch. He's exciting. He he's the type of guy who if you're going to try to be aggressive on him, he's going to make you pay by throwing the ball deep. He knows how to find the right receivers. He he trusts his playmakers to make the right situations. And for the most part, UCF's defense has been pretty solid, particularly their secondary. So I think that's going to be a really tough matchup for Colorado. I expect it to be close to some capacity, but if Colorado's defense doesn't show up the same way that it did for the Baylor or the Colorado State game, I definitely imagine them having some trouble versus UCF. And it's going to be one of those games where it's going to be maybe a shootout, but one of those shootouts where I think UCF's going to just outdo it against them. And then after that, you look at 23 Kansas. You look they they host Kansas State, which obviously the BYU game's not ideal, but you do have some potential in that game to get a win there. And then you play a tough Arizona team, Cincinnati, and so on and so forth. But I think when you look at this Colorado team full circle, obviously I'll be the first one to say that the goal for Colorado should be getting to a bowl game. After even before Dion, you know, Colorado as a football program, struggled immensely, averaging, 2-3 wins a season. So when you bring in someone like Dion, who's so polarizing, he, you know, he's confident. He's maybe you can even argue maybe he has an arrogance to him to some degree, but he owns what he says and he says what he thinks, and that's something that is admirable about him, regardless of whether or not you agree with it you you hate it, or whatever aspect or spin you want to put on it. But ultimately, he's projecting the program the way that he wants to, and he's owning it. So when I look at this program, I mean you have Shedeur Sanders, who is averaging 300 plus yards a game. I think throughout the season, the offensive line is still going to be an issue. It's just a matter of to what extent can Shedeur stay healthy throughout the rest of the season? Because I anticipate if he takes too many hits against a really tough discipline team like a UCF or a Kansas State, or even or even even maybe or even a Utah later down the line, I find it really difficult for them to really be competitive in the long term throughout the season. So I think you have to be more creative and finding ways to do that, whether that means adding some tight end packages where you're shifting to max protection, or or trying to find different avenues like that where he can get the ball out quicker, because a lot of Colorado's offense is a little bit more of an air raid where you're not going to see that many rushing plays other than Shedeur kind of scrambling out. So I am curious to see to what extent these next couple weeks do we see Pat Shermer's offense? Are we going to see more of the same in terms of the play calling, or are they going to try to be creative in the sense of trying to limit the amount of hits that he's taking? Because right now, as it is, it's unsustainable with the amount of hits that he's taking. And I think Shedeur, regardless of what you think about him, he deserves way more credit than he's actually getting for what he's done too. And not to mention too, you know I think it would be great to see this just as a defensive minded sort of guy. But you know, to me, Travis Hunter is probably one of the favorites, not the favorite for the Heisman Trophy right now. I mean, he's having an incredible season, and to be one of those guys who plays on pretty much every down. And I think that's a fun argument to have with people too. I'd be curious to see that in the comments in terms of you know is Travis Hunter more effective as an offensive player or a defensive player? Because when I first, was watching film on this team, earlier in the season, particularly, with their tough loss against Nebraska, one of the questions I was asking myself was, hey, if you were having to, you know, if you were forced to put Travis Hunter either on the offensive side of the ball or defensive side of the ball, or in a sense of when he does go to the NFL, you know, as a scout, which side of the ball would I think of? And at first, I was more inclined that he would be a better corner, because I do think he is a really solid man to man guy. He can play zone when necessary. He doesn't really get beat too much. But in the same token, I mean, when you see some of the plays that he makes on offense, and he's constantly doing his best to get open 100 plus yards a game, it's really just speaks volumes to the type of player that he's become. And and having schemes and routes and all that stuff that's putting him in the best place to succeed. But moving forward with this Colorado team, I think they are going to continue being one of the best storylines in all of the Big 12. Now, do I think they're in the same boat as Utah or Oklahoma State? No, but moving forward, you do have a pretty manageable schedule. You do avoid some of the top dogs in the Big 12, and if they can resolve some of the offensive line issues that they have, really try to keep that you know protection as clean as you can for Shedeur. And if you can find ways week after week to try to make the defense a little better, particularly on the defensive line, trying to get some more pressure on these quarterbacks, the more I think that this team can be at least in a bowl game at the very least.